Sustainability and Resilience Department, Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Citizens Advisory Committee. And I would ask that we conduct a roll call of those who are present, please.
Chair Chris Klein, Vice Chair Penny Owens, Committee Member Lee Heller,
Present.
Committee Member Lori Gaskin,
Present.
Committee Member Stephanie Moret, Present. Committee Member Ann Burdett,
Present.
Committee Member Todd Rulon Miller.
Present.
Thank you very much. We have in front of us for action approval of the minutes from the May 15th, 2024 meeting. And I will entertain a motion to approve
So moved.
by Lee Heller and a second.
I will second the motion.
Thank you. And are there any corrections, additions, changes to the minutes? Hearing none, I would ask that you so indicate your approval with an aye. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And any nays? And any abstentions? Todd, do you want to abstain or?
No, I wasn't here. I didn't know if I should vote.
Okay. How about abstain?
Abstain.
And I'll vote yay. Thank you very much. Are there any agenda adjustments? None? Okay. And we'll turn over to any public comment from our city council rep or anyone in the audience. Okay. Hearing none. Committee member and staff communications. Are you going to mention
Yes.
Creek Week?
Melissa Hetrick, your new interim Creeks Division Manager. I'm interim until mid-October. And for those of you that don't know me, my normal position is Resilience Program Supervisor in the Sustainability Division. So I work on a team that works on climate adaptation. And I've been with the city since 2008, I believe. I used to be in planning, doing environmental review. I actually worked with Cameron on creek buffers and many other swim projects. And then before that, I worked at the Coastal Commission and did environmental consulting. So here I am as your interim manager. And so I have a couple updates, actually. The permanent recruitment, or the recruitment for the permanent Creeks manager just got released. And it's an internal promotional recruitment. I believe it's closing September 16th. So getting the process rolling on that. We have a new Creeks project assistant planner, Caroline Shepard, who's starting September 9th, and her time's going to be split between development review for SWIMP and water quality. So we're really excited to welcome her to the team. And then I passed out, Creek Week planning is underway. The schedule is still changing, but it's September 21st to 28th. We would like to change the Creeks Advisory Committee meeting that's scheduled currently on the 18th to the 25th, and instead do at the same time at 5:30 a site visit to Oak Park, which is that restoration project is currently under construction. It's super exciting to stop by if you haven't done so yet.
Can I point out a typo?
Yeah.
It says Oak Park Restoration Site Visit. You might want to switch
No,
the
we
S.
renamed a park.
Oh, that works too. Okay. Anyway, if you're going to be printing more.
It's a work in progress.
Fair
This
enough.
is a work
Just,
in
that's
progress.
the English teacher in me is just
Yeah.
offering you a little.
We appreciate that. So yeah, we'd be taking a look at the construction project there, and then Ms. Markey will be letting you all know how the bird refuge management has been going, and I believe that was a request of the CAC. And then there'll be a number of events, as you can see. We are going to have our traditional land shark tour. We're launching urban creek trails. Ms. Murray's in charge of that. We're starting with the lower Mission Creek area. And she'll be leading a tour as part of that. We'll have coffee at the creek as usual, and as I mentioned, we're trying to schedule a happy hour event for all of our community partners. So that's all the announcements I have. If other committee members have announcements.
Any announcements from committee members? I would like to welcome Todd. This is your first official meeting.
I'm excited.
Oh, you should be. It's a great committee, and we do a lot of meaningful work through this extraordinary staff. And you'll be able to see it on the ground as well as during planning. And it's pretty phenomenal, and it touches everyone's lives.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
I actually have a question or two. Is that all right?
Please.
So Melissa, nice to meet you. And I had Aaron earlier for a tour a month or so ago. I had two of the three, but not you. And it was wonderful to see it. My background is in rivers and creeks and environmental stuff, just as that is of interest. I just had two questions. When I talked to Aaron, I think, and this is now months ago, there were some open staffing positions. Is one of the person or people you've talked about filling those positions? I just want to make sure you're up to resource staff.
So, yeah, there's the Creeks manager position, which is currently vacant
Yeah.
and interim and being, and then there's also a vacant supervising planner position that used to be George Johnson's. And so that recruitment for that level position would happen after the Creeks manager position.
I see. Well, I'm not volunteering any more than I'd love to help hiring if you'd like some, in terms of candidates who would like to meet some board member or someone associated. I've done a lot of that in my commercial world, hiring. So I just offer that as a possibility for you. The second thing I wanted to ask you was when I talked to Chris Klein at an introductory, I think I've got the name right, who is associated with hotels, obviously. You know, he mentioned that getting our brochures and promotions into hotels was really an interesting or good idea. Maybe that's already happened or not, but I wanted to volunteer that I think that's an excellent idea. If not the appropriate time now to discuss it, fine. But I think we've got so much wondrous stuff to show, and I just want them to go beyond the beach when they come down to Santa Barbara.
No, and I think that's a really good comment. We're actually meeting with Chris Klein in the next week or so to talk about that, and I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And we are planning, likely in November, we'll see an outreach workshop to really workshop some of the ideas that we've been talking about and that I think Mr. Klein was interested in too.
Great, thank you.
Chair Gaskin, it sounds like Todd should be appointed to the Education and Outreach Committee.
My middle name is Outreach, so I'm ready to go.
And thank you so much, Todd. Those are excellent. I think just to clarify, we are not necessarily a board that has any legal responsibilities, particularly relative to hiring. Staff and city staff do that, and we simply warmly welcome and work with who is selected. So, yeah. I had a question, though. The position for Creek manager, you said closes September 16th?
September 13th.
September 13th.
13th, okay. And the goal is to have that individual, because it's an internal on board, I'm thinking, October 1 kind of thing? Is that the goal, or?
I think the goal is to have that person on board right when my interim term ends, which is mid-October.
Got it. Thank you. Great. Okay. Anything else? All right. Thanks very much. We have business items, and the first is the Brown Act presentation. And let's see, how are we doing that?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for.
I'll just quickly introduce.
Thank you.
Online is John Doimus, our Assistant City Attorney. And in general, most of the commissions and committees receive this presentation once a year, usually around February, but we didn't get to it this year. But even I, looking at the presentation, am surprised about some of the recent changes, especially to things like online, Facebook, and other email correspondence. Things have really changed in this arena. So Mr. Doimus is going to give a presentation, but I feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Commission. I'm sorry I could not be there in person. I had a previous appointment, but I didn't want to miss this meeting, so thank you, staff, for accommodating me. They told me it's easier if I just turn my camera off for City TV, so I will do that. So as Melissa said, feel free to ask any questions you want afterwards. I'm happy to, spend as much time as needed to answer these questions. It is a complicated act, but I'm going to highlight the most important things. There'll be three things I'm really going to focus on to pay attention, but I do want to go through all the nuances and everything else as to this act. So let's start. Let's go for first. I'll turn my video off, but when I answer questions at the end, I'll put it there. So can we go to the next slide, please? So with this presentation, obviously we're going to cover who is covered or who is part of the Brown Act, who does it apply to, right? And second is what is a meeting, what would be a legal meeting. We're going to go into what's required on notices and agendas. We're going to talk about public participation rights and part of that, what constitutes closed session. That we don't have to worry so much about, but I just thought I'd provide some information on that. And then what happens if a violation of the Brown Act? And then just one thing I noticed too, it's interesting, we were talking about before about the meeting minutes. So even if you didn't attend the previous meeting, you still can vote on the meeting minutes. The only time we would say never to vote on a meeting you didn't attend is like an administrative hearing, when you're acting like as an administrative judge deciding an appeal. But you can approve the minutes. So if they're like, for example, just had enough as a quorum, you needed that one extra person to approve the meeting minutes, you could do so even if they missed the previous meeting. So next slide, please. So I love this quote. This is the first highlight, right? This is the first point I want to go to, right? It's right, the introductory code section for the statute, the Brown Act, which is found in the California Government Code. And I'll just read it because it boils down to the gist and the purpose of this, right? It says the people of the state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so they may retain control over the instruments they have created. And that's the key. The Brown Act is definitely not the most convenient mechanism. Private business, they would throw it out in the private sector, right? It's not the most efficient way to get things done because it can delay things, everything else. But it's this quote that's important because it's about the transparency. It's about allowing the public to know. So sometimes when we are having a meeting and we're kind of venturing a conversation and getting really into the substance of a topic that's not on the agenda, we know what's the big deal. The purpose of that is so we have to place on the agenda so someone who would be interested in that topic could see it and would know to attend and offer public comment. That's why it's also important. That's why also you'll see these email rules, these Facebook rules. It's again for the public's benefit, not for our convenience or anything else. It's for them to be able to see the deliberations, to offer or opine to you about their input, and to be able to attend and know what is going on. So that's the first tenet. Keep in mind whenever you're communicating something in a meeting, it's not on an agenda, why we ask, no, we got to stop there, right? It's for the public benefit. Or why we say don't email each other on subject matter jurisdictions with this committee. And we'll go more into that in detail. But that's the first premise, is to understand what the purpose is, why this act, why this legislation was even created in the first place. Next slide, please. So who does it apply to, right? So it obviously applies to city councils, city boards and commissions, so you, and then groups created by boards and commissions, right? So we'll get into that. Now we've kind of, the city has over, I think, 71 boards and commissions, which is, pretty high, especially for a city of a population just shy of $100,000. So what we've tried to do is kind of eliminate these standing committees or other Brown Act committees, because mainly just the resources and the staff, because since they are Brown Act, they have to be staffed as well. So when you think about when you have over 70 boards and committees, if you start allowing that to splinter further, it just becomes a very strenuous number to cover and all that. So, but we'll go into what those are. But for this board of commission, we really don't have to worry about that. But I wanted to kind of explain the situation. Next slide, please. So here's the one thing: we create a standing committee, right? So what is a standing committee? It's a committee. I'll go to one that comes top of my head. For the longest time, the Harbors Commission had a cruise ship committee dealing with that, right? And what that is less than a quorum of members. It can include members of not legislative body, and they have advisory or decision-making abilities. It can have both, and they have continuing jurisdiction over a particular subject matter, and they have a fixed meeting schedule. Another one is State Street Committee. That's another one that comes to mind. For these type of committees that are created, right? City Council elected to create State Street Committee. The Brown Act applies. All the meeting rules apply. Everything else that applies to you applies to such a thing. So, so while the State Street Committee wasn't created by ordinance in terms of like a regular city ordinance we have codified or by city charter, and the city charter, just to explain briefly, is the city's constitution. Any amendment or changes to the city charter must be done by a vote of the people. And there's about 8 or 9 boards or commissions created out of that. Obviously, the Brown Act applies to those, but even standing committees are created by a city council, could be created by this committee, could be created by a fire and police commission, a civil service. The Brown Act applies. Next slide, please. An ad hoc committee also can call a work study group meeting. That it doesn't apply, right? So it's again less than a quorum, right? It's comprised solely of the members of that committee. It's only advisory, so it has no decision-making powers. It's very short-term and no fixed meeting schedule. So those are like if we're doing a study or something, or you want a commissioner to kind of explore an issue and make a report back to the general committee. That's fine because the Brown Act doesn't apply. That doesn't strain the resources. Generally people will refer to, like I said, ad hoc. I like work group meeting, right? Because that's what it's doing. It could be 1 or 2 commissioners that have been like appointed by the commission to explore an issue. I couldn't catch the commissioner's name, but like doing outreach, that's a great deal. We like doing that. Talking to the public. There's not a fixed meeting schedule. It's just less than a quorum, and that's not where a Brown Act applies. And a lot of great work can be done in these work group meetings. And what they do usually is compile information, whatever it may be. Then on a set agenda item, they will kind of explore whatever they were tasked to do to the general commission. Again, it's only advisory. Next slide, please. And then just for curiosity, right? It could be a private or corporation, LLC, was created by the city to delegate authority. The Brown Act applies. It also applies to council members elect. So if the election's in November and they're waiting to take the oath of office in January, during that time, even though they're not having not been sworn in, the Brown Act would still apply in terms of emails, everything else. And then also private corporations and LLCs that are funded by the city and have a voting member from the city's legislative body. We really don't have that in Santa Barbara, but that's another Brown Act. Next slide, please. So again, what is a meeting? Pretty common sense, right? It's to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action. So what we're doing right here, right now. So, and you need, in order to activate the meeting or put the key in ignition for the engine to turn on, you need more than a quorum, basically. That's it on that. Next slide, please. And what is an action, right? An action could be a collective decision, right? After hearing an item, right? It could be issuing a decision. It could be issuing an opinion or a promise in the future by the majority, positive, negative, to make a decision. Or an actual said, and it doesn't have to be an actual vote. Like if we never did roll call, but the first part we did was a collective decision and it was orally communicated. That could constitute as an action in the record, right, where you're looking back at. Or an actual vote, obviously, would constitute an action as well. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the more interesting, kind of the more nuances, right, in terms of the 2 types of meetings that are kind of unlawful. So first one we're talking about here, serial meetings, right? So any type of meetings where either through directly or through intermediaries, you're discussing, deliberating, taking actions outside the meeting, right? So anytime you're in a meeting, if it's an item on the agenda, deliberate, take action. If the item calls for it, you are in the safe zone, not a problem. It's outside these meetings we have to worry about. And there's ways that maybe it doesn't click. You think, oh, how could this be a violation? It can be, and we'll explore that right now. So next slide, please. So how does that occur, right? Through notes, not maybe stone tablets, texting, emails. Emails and texting are the most common things. And so next slide, please. We'll see one example of it. So the two types we always kind of people use on this is a chain and wagon, right? In terms of, and just visually think of it, right? That's why they have these lexicon here for these on this slide, right? We'll go into like what would be considered a serial meaning for like in terms of a chain, how that works, and then the wheel and the spoke. Especially pay attention to the center of the wheel and how the spoke just expands out. Next slide, please. So here's a chain meaning, right? And a communication can go, and we'll get into it. It has to be one of the slides I'll really kind of dispel a myth, right? It's not preventing any of the committee members from ever talking to each other, right? It's in regards to issues that the committee has purview over, right? So if we're talking about the weather, we're talking about the general election, if we're talking about sports, that's fine. That doing it through emails, doing it through text, you're not prohibiting. There's not an injunction when you volunteer to be on this commission to prohibit be able to talk to each other. It's about issues that are subject matter to this commission, right? And so let's give the first example, right? If Commissioner A talks to B and B talks to C and C talks to D, whether through email, through even just on the phone or through text message, a violation can occur because that message is going around through like a chain link. And A will have no clue that that D even knows it, because if you have A to B to C to D, and if you have like a 7-member commission, that's 4 commissioners. That's a quorum. If they had a communication of subject matter of that commission, they've committed a Brown Act violation, and there's a good chance none of the 4 even knew they did that, right? If it's not through a group, if it's not through a group email or a group text message, it can be totally innocent. That's why, just to be safe, it's one of those things. Better be safe than sorry. It's easier to just not communicate with each other on subject matter jurisdictions of this commission, and just wait for the meeting. The wagon wheel is a different kind of process of how it could occur, right? It's kind of having the center of the spoke, as I was mentioned. A talks to B, then A talks to C, A talks to D. So A is the main center of that wheel. But as they're communicating, as he or she's communicating to the different committee members, that message is getting through to all of them. And outside the meeting, another Brown Act violation occurs. Now, maybe A knows that they talk to B, C, and D, and commissioner and all that, but B, C, and D don't, and they just don't know that a quorum, we're talking about an issue, or it could be an agenda item that's coming up. And so that's another reason why, that's another way that the Brown Act violation can occur. Next slide, please. Now we have something on social media. Now this is something new, became effective 3 years ago. It expires or sunsets, at least for now, in January 2026. It may continue. A lot of times laws that sunset, they make them permanent. So it really has a stricter rule regarding communications between 2 members of the legislative body, right? So it applies to internet social media platforms, right? So Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever it is. And here's the simple rule to remember, right? A member cannot respond directly to any other member on the internet-based social media platform regarding a subject matter within the jurisdiction of that legislative body. So it doesn't have to be, you're not even worrying about a quorum here. One can't talk to the other. So let's say everyone in this commission is Facebook friends, right? And someone posted an issue regarding city creeks, and like in terms of keeping them clean or and sanitary, or a project or something they would review, whatever it may be. Even if someone put like a thumbs up or a like or sent a message, even a DM, that would be a violation. Even if it's just one commission to another. Now, of course, you can be Facebook friends. Again, talk about all other issues outside of. You can talk about issues regarding the city. You can talk about the police department, because that's not what the jurisdiction of this commission is. The fire department, you name it, airport, a harbor. It's just you can't talk about creeks. And with that, it's just one rule: just refrain from communicating with each other on social media regarding the subject matter of this jurisdiction. Next slide, please. And like I said, now the difference I want, what a lot of times I've talked to different committee or board members, they get discouraged is like, well, this means we can't communicate on our social media about the great work the commission does or get the word out no, you can absolutely do that. Brown Act does not apply, and here's the key. Brown Act does not apply when you're communicating with members of the public. You know, that is fine. And Brown Act does not apply when you talk to city staff, right? You can do that. That's why you'll see in emails, city staff send a group all message about whether the meeting's being canceled or something like that. Or we'll see maybe, we'll do it off in the city attorney's office where you send an opinion or an issue. We will send an email to the entire council, entire planning commission, whatever it may be. That's not a Brown Act violation because we are not a member of the legislative body. So we can do that to keep the board informed. What has to stop is then there can't be a reply off from that commission member or board member or council member to start this dialogue, right? If there are questions, just email the staff person directly, not a reply all. So again, you can use your social media, your Twitter, all that to communicate with the public, to raise awareness, all that. Just don't communicate with each other on it regarding, again, subject matter jurisdiction of this board or committee, right? And then, next slide, please. Again, majority may not use social media platform to discuss agency business. Again, they cannot respond to any messages. And as I mentioned, that even includes, believe it or not, because even on First Amendment cases, thumbs up, likes, emojis, believe it or not, have been considered communicative speech from a First Amendment standpoint. And since that's considered communicative speech from a First Amendment standpoint, that is why you have that rule there. Well, it's some type of communication. If I'm making a comment regarding the subject matter jurisdiction, if I think this is the policy of what we should do or the city should have, right? And another commission member gives a thumbs up to it, well, guess what? You just had a communication violating the Brown Act in terms of, even if it's a thumb up, it's not words, there's still some expression behind that. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, so like I said, I'm covering some of the stuff as I'm talking through it. Again, it doesn't apply, Brown Act does not apply to the staff having separate conversations with the members outside of the meeting to answer questions. What staff cannot do, or they can't be a homing pigeon, right? They can't be used that way. Staff can't communicate to one commission member and then talk to another commission member and say, well, this is what Commissioner A said, and then so on and so on. So that can't be. Sometimes, like I said, staff can communicate also to lessen a quorum, right? So that we can, meet 2 or 3, depending on the size of the commission, 2 or 3 commissioners at a time too. Now we can't, again, relay that to the other commissioners if you're having 2 or 3, because then you probably get a Brown Act violation. So you can do that because it's less than a quorum. Again, it doesn't apply to staff. So always feel free to contact staff when you have questions. Staff will always send emails out to the group at large. Just kind of refrain, just to be safe. Don't hit that reply all button. Just talk to staff individually. Next slide, please. Another thing people always worrying about, like, oh no, if there's a community member, community meeting, and I see, 3 other commissioners are, oh, we have a quorum, we're having a legal meeting. No, that's not the case. For community meetings, a quorum, all the commissioners they want can attend it. That's not an issue. The only rule for those is just don't have, when you see each other, talk to each other. Don't even be scared to talk to each other. I've had those type of questions before in the past. Oh, I did good because I didn't make sure I made even no eye contact. No, you can do that. Just don't have sidebar conversations. Again, what on the subject matter jurisdiction of what the commission is. Next slide, please. Again, you can also attend a open notice meeting of another legislative body. You can attend a city council meeting to see on that and just sit in the gallery and listen and all that. Again, though, don't have sidebar discussions with each other. So those are some of the misnomers of the Brown Act that people think, oh, all of a sudden, as soon as you have a collective group attending another meeting, nope, that's not a violation per se. It's are you talking to each other, and are you talking to each other about what your jurisdiction is over? Next slide, please. Final thing, same thing, ceremonial items. Fire and Police Commission love going into the swearing in ceremonies of new firefighters and new officers. All of them usually attend. That's not a problem at all. They can all attend, right? And that is, within the subject matter, it's fire and police, but they can attend that ceremonial item. What they don't do is they don't talk to each other about like the fire and police department or their budgets or anything else, or hiring, or is it up or is it down? They refrain from that. They can just have general conversations outside of that. Again, no sidebar discussions. Next slide, please. Again, Brown Act, people always think, I've had claims that, city staff had a meeting on this and violated the Brown Act. No, city staff can have internal staff meetings. Again, we're not a member of the legislative body. I mean, if we put that rule there, then no business could ever get done. Again, a passive distribution of a document to body members, like, for example, a city attorney's office will send out a legal memo to city council, planning commission, or ABR, or fire. That again does not constitute a meeting. That again does not violate the Brown Act. Here's a send all to all the board members. Brief explanation. That's fine. Again, we just ask for the board members do not hit a reply all and start having a conversation with them. That's where you get in trouble. Next slide, please. Now there's a recent case out of Ventura, believe it or not. It actually happened in the Crown Plaza, where they had a council members had a Chamber of Commerce event where the mayor delivered a state of the city breakfast in there. And there's an exception to the Brown Act, like I said, that allows majority of the members to attend a conference or similar gathering open to the public that involves to the general interest of the public agencies, right? And that's not an issue right there. A conference that charges admission, and a lot of times you'll see an admission charge, right? You're not getting that's fine. As long as the admission it's considered open for the public, as long as the admission sales are available to all the members of the public, right? So you can do that and you can attend that. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate on the Ventura case, all members of the public can attend a general meeting or state of the union of the city. It's still considered open to the public. If there's even if the whole public can in charge of admission, but those rules about not talking to each other, those sidebar discussions still apply. So that's what that Ventura case really gets the heart to. Now we have in terms of teleconference meetings, right? So teleconference, especially after COVID, we started hitting that. It can be audio, video, or both. City must post the agendas at all the teleconference locations. So so if I am a board member that can't attend but I want to appear through teleconference, right? They have to post my location on the agenda. But in order to have that meeting, a quorum still must be within the location and jurisdiction of the city. Next slide, please. And then finally, we're talking about in terms of agendas, right? Agendas are required for every Brown Act meeting, right? Discussion is always limited to what's on the agenda. One time, I remember having a mix-up on the police building. I can't remember if it was planning commission or fire, and we had all the architects, everyone there, and everyone's like, everyone's here. They travel all this way. Can we just talk about it even briefly? And I had to say no. There was a mistake in the agenda. It was not agendized. And again, it goes back to that first slide I said, right? Who's the benefit it for? It's not for the benefit of people that came to give a speech. It's not for the benefit of the commission that night who really wanted to hear updates on the police building. It's for the benefit of the public. And since it was not on the agenda, the public could not, didn't know to attend or not. Maybe they would have been interested in it. And that's why we could not go on with that item, right? Matters may be added on the agenda only rare, urgent circumstances. We're talking about states of emergency. We don't have to worry about here, especially being, I heard the chair talking about how we are an advisory board. That is correct. So we don't have to worry about that. They must be held in the city, again, very limited circumstances. All those circumstances that are delineated in the statute are all emergency. Meeting hall must be non-discriminatory and free of charge. I remember one of the reasons why when I started, we changed the police, Fire and Police Commission used to have their meetings in the basement of the police station. And of course they had security checkpoints and sometimes people weren't there. And so we had to move it because it made it very difficult for the public to attend. They had to go through all these obstacles. So we moved it to the firehouse and kept the doors open at the time. Now we're in city council chambers, which is an ideal place to be. So, can't be discriminatory, can't be free of charge. Other rules too, when we have public comment, some people will list their names. We can't require a person to state their name for public comment. We can't require have a person state where they live, etc. Special meetings are a little bit different. Special meetings are, for agenda items that must be posted 72 hours in advance. Special meetings are 24 hours in advance. There's no general public comment for special meetings, and special meetings can only be usually for urgent circumstances. Doesn't have to be life safety, right? But like it could be critical timing of an issue or something. And the agenda can only be limited to obviously that topic of what the special meeting is for. And public comment can only be limited to that agenda item. Like I said, there's no general public comment. Next slide, please. As I mentioned again, hitting two slides at once. I apologize. For regular agendas, you need 72 hours notice before it. And again, brief description. Usually you don't have to exceed 20 words. Just give the public an idea of what they are meeting about, what the item is about. That's all you need for that. And then the agenda must specify a time, location of where it is. It should be in a public accessible location. A lot of times we have it in front of City Hall doors and on the city website. And staff does a wonderful job doing that. Next slide, please. And again, as I mentioned, there's not really been a case on record for a prosecution on this, on the Brown Act in terms of the agendas. But again, it must be limited discussions to what's on the agenda. But there are 5 exceptions. I'll go through them now. Next slide, please. So it's kind of what we've done here today. So members of the legislative body can briefly respond to statements made or questions said in public comment. I've seen council do a wonderful job where people will make the public comment or kind of explain maybe a difficult circumstance they're facing. And the council member may ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions and kind of directing the staff to help them. That's one common thing I've seen. It's wonderful, and it should be. When people are addressing the government. So the Brown Act is there for a purpose, but it's not unduly harsh, right? So that's one. Again, we've kind of had that tonight. You can ask staff in terms of making announcements, clarifications. That's a perfect item. I love how it's agendized here for staff communications. You already did that about 15 minutes ago. Perfect. Another example. Next slide, please. You can also request staff to report back to the body at a subsequent meeting, so you can have that and have that kind of discussion. Well, this item's not on the agenda. Can we agendize in the future? Can you report back at a different meeting, right? That's what kind of 4 and 5 are. Or also provide a reference to staff or other resources for factual information. So 3, 4, and 5, I have it there because they kind of usually tie together, and it happens frequently. Like, well, can we put this on for another meeting? Or, here's a resource I'd like staff to kind of explore, or maybe a guest speaker to invite. Can we do that? That happens a lot, and that's something that you can talk about. And again, you can talk about, hey, this would be a good item to place on the agenda for a future meeting. Absolutely, do that. Just don't go into substantive discussion. I think this item should be on the meeting. 1 sentence, that's it. You start going more than 1 sentence, now you're talking substantively. That's where you got to be careful on that. Next slide, please. And then, again, as I mentioned, if it's an urgent situation, which I hope in this board we never have to worry about it, right? It needs 2/3 of the members, so it's more than just a simple majority. And if it's less than 2/3 present, a unanimous vote of those members present. And again, there's a need to take immediate action, and it came to the attention after the agenda was posted. So it could have been something that we knew before 72 hours. And then, you know what, someone decided to ring the alarm bell. It had to be something that needs immediate action, and it happened in that time period between less than 72 hours and the start of the meeting. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, kind of again, just for the interest of time, we talked about special meetings. Again, it's just 24 hours. We still need to deliver written notice to the local newspaper, radio, television, and no other business can be discussed at special meetings. It's a special meeting, it's not a regular meeting, so there's no general public comment. There's not like staff communications, any of that. It's just that one or two items that are the reason for that special meeting. Next slide, please. And then here's something that's important. So as I mentioned, to attend it, the general public, they don't have to provide their name or other information, or even complete, questionnaire or fulfill anything. Attendance lists or guest cards must state that they're signing or registered voluntarily, because there should be the purpose of that, there should be no chilling effect. There shouldn't be these obstacles to basically chill people from participating or speaking to a government agency body. It can already be intimidating enough. I really am impressed with the public when they come speak up to city council. I could even tell that some people are nervous, but I really admire that fact. And imagine placing these type of obstacles or saying, no, you have to tell us your name, or no, it's already hard enough. So that's why these requirements are not there. Next slide, please. Any person can record a meeting, right? These meetings are being recorded as well. A legislative body in the meeting can make a finding not to record, for example, if there's any kind of disturbance. And these are the same rules that would apply in a courtroom. And then there are also public records. All these meetings, anyone else can make a public record. So we do have something that's nice and easy now, since all these things are online. There's a new act, the Public Records Act, that if we can point to where they're located on the internet, that's where we generally send people instead of producing it, unless they don't have the technology to access it. Next slide, please. And again, for public participation for regular meeting, right? They can talk about their general public comment. They can talk about either any agenda item, but they must wait for the agenda item to talk about that. But for general public comment, they can talk about any item that is part of the jurisdiction. For special meetings, it has to be just what that item is. Next slide, please. Now I'm going over time. I'll be really quick. Again, you can't prohibit public criticism. There's a case out of Southern California City regarding a Nazi salute. Nazi salute was fine, but when what happened was during that meeting when it was causing public disturbances, that's when the Board of Commission were able to take action. Next slide, please. So meeting disruption, if it's a quick thing, if it's becoming unruly, and it'll kind of merge with the next slide. What we usually do is ask the commission to ask to stop. If it doesn't stop, they will take a break. You can just on the meeting kind of leave the dais. We usually, if the person doesn't cooperate, then we'll have to call law enforcement, and they can be removed from the meeting. But we try to give that person a warning first. We're required by law to do that. Next slide, please. And that's what I mentioned right there. It's a new law that occurred, got in, I think in 2 years ago. And again, we must provide a warning to the individual that they're disrupting the meeting, and that would result in removal. That's all that's required. So it must be a warning first given. You just can't remove them automatically. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned quickly, I think we've kind of dealt with this before in terms of being able to, through email, about attending remotely. You can participate remotely without identifying your location, right? If the quorum of the members participate from a singular location, so like here, it's identifying the agenda, and there's just cause or emergency circumstances requiring their remote participation. Next slide, please. And what just cause is child care, care of a parent, guard, sibling, contagious illness prevents someone from attending, a need related to physical and mental disability, travel while official business for the legislative body, the city, or another state or local agency, so it can't be a private entity. An emergency circumstance is defined as physical or family medical emergency that prevents a member from attending that meeting. Next slide, please. And then members may not participate remotely for a period of more than 3 consecutive months or 20% of the regular meetings. And then for that just cause we were talking about, can rely on it no more than 2 times in a calendar year. And when you're using the audio visual technology, you must disclose during the meeting if there's anyone with you over the age of 18 at that remote location. This provision under AB 2449 will sunset on January 1st, 2026. Next slide, please. And we kind of covered that. Sorry for rushing at the end. I know we're kind of going over time, so I want to be mindful. I can go to the next slide. I think that covers it. And just quickly, don't have to worry about it. Closed sessions, we never have to worry about it, but there are 5 ways you can go to closed sessions away from the public, and that's regarding personnel matters, regarding pending lawsuits or actual lawsuits in there, labor negotiations, real property, or a security threat. And the premise behind that is, there are obvious reasons why you wouldn't want the public to know. It could compromise litigation, the privacy rights for personnel matters, compromising labor negotiations, etc. So that's why those are allowed in the Brown Act to be in a closed session, not in public. Still part of a meeting, just they adjourn to a separate room. Next slide, please. Okay, I think that's it. Again, I apologize for the quick speed round at the end, but I wanted to be mindful of everyone's time. And happy. Melissa, do I have any time for any questions?
Yes, we can handle some questions. First of all, I want to thank you so very much. That was a very thorough presentation, so I appreciate that. Are there questions from the committee? Anne?
So first of all, I guess I just want to clarify how broad or narrow the subject matter jurisdiction of this committee is, because I know some of us are on boards of organizations unaffiliated with the city that discuss issues involving creeks, some of which take place within the city of Santa Barbara, but are not items that are directly being discussed by this committee. And so does that fall within like the subject matter jurisdiction if it has anything to do with creeks in Santa Barbara, or is it just if it's like an item that's been on the agenda of this committee?
It could be. Look, I don't think you have to worry about it in your case, because if you're serving on other boards or jurisdictions, what triggers it is when you're talking to other members in this committee, right? So if you're talking about creeks regarding Santa Barbara, that is a subject matter jurisdiction of this committee, but you're not serving or not talking with other committee members. So that's why the Brown Act is not invoked in that situation. You can talk. So if you're in a committee with 6 other or volunteering in an organization with other members, and none of the members for that committee are here in this room next to you on the dais, that's not a Brown Act violation. It only applies when you're talking with each other. I think there's 7 members on this committee. All 7. It's with each other, not outside of that. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. My follow-up to that is that some of the organizations that we're on collaborate with each other, and they're like, if for example there's a meeting of an alliance between multiple nonprofits and several members of this committee are there representing their own nonprofits, is that, because I don't think that counts as a public meeting because it's just between nonprofits. So I'm wondering, should we avoid having more than a certain number of us in those types of meetings?
It doesn't matter if it's a public. It's not defined as a public meeting. If the members, if you have more than a quorum of the members there attending these meetings that are representing the different nonprofits, and you're having a conversation regarding the city creeks, etc. Yeah, that is an issue. I can definitely talk to you more offline on that to give more guidance. But that would be an issue then, where you would have to have Brown Act concerns.
I think to clarify, however, that collaborative of NGOs as a nonprofit have no decision-making, that alliance has no decision-making authority, no vested responsibility other than to share. And we're talking about creeks in Santa Barbara County in general, so it's not specific necessarily to creeks in the city of Santa Barbara as this collective, collaborative of NGOs.
True, and those scenarios too, on those scenarios whether Brown Act is triggered or not, it really is so fact dependent. So it's really hard for me to provide a kind of a generalization of, okay, yeah, that's it. I would need to know again the facts, what's being talked about, who's attending, how, why, where. So it's really so fact intensive to be able to to understand whether a meeting is or not. So if there are any issues, our office is always available. Feel free to reach out to me if you are having an upcoming meeting where there's concerns, and you can give me details. That absolutely can advise you on that.
Thank you. And other questions? Or Stefan, anyone? Todd? No? No? I just had two clarifications, if I may. Slide 37, where you're talking about AB 2449. And it's talking about emergency circumstances that would allow a member to participate remotely. And there were three provisions. And the third one speaks about just cause or made a request which must be approved by the legislative body. So if it's an emergency, this is just a perfunctory sort of question. If it's an emergency, how can the legislative body approve it in advance? Or is it is it added to the agenda as a?
So there are situations exactly. You're going in the right direction, right? So they're there remotely, and so for example, we have a situation we don't know if the chair or vice chair we're going to attend. So in that kind of situation, what happens is the first item is you don't add who's going to elect the temporary chair for this meeting because there's no, let's say the vice chair can't attend. So what you do is you just have a vote right then and there who's going to be the temporary chair for this one meeting to do that. That's kind of the same thing. That's a situation that doesn't have to be agendized. It just has to be approved. The attendance has to be approved by the committee. So that's how it works. Right?
Thank you so much for that. Was perfect clarification.
It's an excellent question.
And I have one last clarification, slide 10. Serial meetings are unlawful, the header. And it says, after the second read item, to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business. That's a particular phrase that I wanted clarification on. Any item of business, does that mean it's an agendized item of business, or that it potentially falls within the scope of the legislative body?
You hit the nail on the head. That's the latter.
Thank you. Okay, hearing none, we thank you so very much. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I was glad.
No worries. Totally
Feel free-
understand.
Staff, feel free to get my email out. You have any other questions or any scenarios or difficulties, one thing we'd like to do too, one down the road is, ethics training and the conflicts of interest training. Those are really important.
Yes.
But if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out. We're there to assist for sure.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Our second agenda item is proposed creek buffer ordinance, and I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Committee member, I believe we have to open up public comment for the last item.
We do?
Yeah, after each item,
There was no action, though?
even without an action, I believe.
Oh, okay. All right. Any public comment? Hearing none, we will move on to agenda item B, which is proposed creek buffer ordinance.
Thank you. So as I get going on this proposal that we're excited to present to you about a new creek buffer ordinance we've been working on, I did just want to say that I'm giving the presentation, but there's a whole city team working on this proposed ordinance, and that includes Aaron Markey, Dan Henschke, our assistant city attorney, and then community development staff, Allison DeBus, city planner, and Brenda Beltz. So I am not working alone. So as you all know, there are many benefits to establishing development buffers from creeks. The first and foremost is really to reduce public safety risks from erosion and flooding that occurs, and also to limit channelization and other alterations of creeks when structures are threatened by erosion and flooding. Additionally, there's substantial water quality benefits to providing natural areas next to streams. The buffers protect riparian and aquatic habitats, And then they really preserve our scenic beauty. Some of the most beautiful places in our city are our creek corridors. So because of this, our general plan for a long time actually has contained policies directing establishment of minimum creek buffers. Our existing municipal code has pretty limited creek buffer regulations. They're listed right there. They really regulate grading and structures allowed within the creek itself. They regulate discharges into creeks. And then Title 2887 and Title 140 pertain to a minimum required setback from Mission Creek, which is 25 feet, for safety purposes. And the reason there's only a setback for Mission Creek is really it was considered the most dangerous creek in the city. It has the biggest watershed, the biggest flow. So any discretionary project that comes in that is subject to CEQA is reviewed for environmental impacts. And through that process, buffers have been determined over time. And it's really on a case-by-case basis. It's based on technical reports. I think applicants and staff and community groups and decision makers alike would tell you how frustrating this can be to have it as a case-by-case basis with no clear regulations in place. It really leads to a lack of consistency and prolongs permitting times. But that is the current process. So in order to try to achieve a start to our buffer ordinances as part of the comprehensive update of our coastal land use plan in 2019, we included creek buffer regulations in the coastal zone. So the coastal land use plan serves as the standard of review for coastal development permitting. So it only applies in the coastal zone. It only applies when projects are not exempt but require full coastal development permits. And the regulations in the coastal land use plan are very detailed. They're really almost code level regulations. And those policies include buffers from top of bank of creeks. So it's 50 feet from the top of bank of most of our major creeks, except for the lower Mission Flood Control Project that's 35. And then there's additional buffers from environmentally sensitive habitat areas. So those include like riparian habitats, wetland habitats, oak woodlands, and a few others. So the goal of this proposed ordinance that we've been working on is to have an ordinance that applies citywide. And so really taking the basics of the regulations in the coastal land use plan and bringing them citywide and making them consistent. The proposed ordinance will apply citywide except for the airport area where specific regulations are in place to protect Goleta Slough. It's a big goal of this ordinance to have objective standards that can be applied ministerially. That's for consistency's sake, but also because many of the state legislated housing laws that are coming down that require like accessory dwelling units and multifamily housing really limit discretionary permitting for projects, and only objective standards that can be applied as planning zone check apply. And so since we're seeing quite a lot of that type of development now, we want to make sure it's safe. We are, as we're moving into this ordinance, we're really looking for it to be objective. And many of the policies in the coastal LUP are actually more discretionary in nature, and so we've had to do some modifying because of that. Again, as we're looking at buffer distances, we're trying to maximize protections while avoiding takings of property. As you know, we have a almost fully built out city. Some of our creeks have zero buffer to existing development. And so as we're looking to look at buffer distances, we really have to look at how a parcel can redevelop and whether or not, how much buffer we can have while avoiding a takings of property. So when, as we move into looking at distances, we're really looking at the buffers that can achieved at the most amount of parcels and leaving a modification process to only those few very severely constrained lots. Again, we want the regulations to be clear and provide for streamlined permitting and consistency in decision-making. And then we want to make sure that the ordinance still allows the city, as part of CEQA and coastal development permitting, to apply larger buffers when special circumstances exist on properties. So the proposed ordinance, we're proposing to put it into Title 22, which is the Environmental Policy and Construction chapter. We would be repealing the Mission Creek ordinance, so this would actually replace that. The buffers would apply to predominantly to new development and what's called substantial redevelopment. The ordinance includes minimum numeric buffers, allowed uses within the buffers, many definitions and procedures, a modification process, and then regulations for what happens for non-conforming development, existing non-conforming development. It will be applied ministerially at zoning plan check unless modifications are sought. So again, as we have been looking at buffer distances, we want to look at a number of issue areas. What are the erosion rates on our streams? What are the bordering habitat areas? A lot of that information was obtained through the creek inventory and assessment study that was done in 2000. Additionally, we mapped every creek area and looked at all the different buffer distances, so 10 feet, 25 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, and really looked at the patterns of existing development, the configurations of existing parcels, and tried to assess what percentage of parcels within what buffer distances, when they're redeveloped, could achieve the buffer versus not. And then we also reviewed our other neighboring jurisdictions and jurisdictions throughout the state. You may or may not know that Santa Barbara County and City of Glida and City of Carpinteria all have creek buffer regulations. They're all generally around 50 feet. So in the buffer ordinance, the proposal right now is to have a minimum buffer of 50 feet from top of bank from all of our major creeks. And they are listed here, but they're basically any creek with a name in the city that has that has a name. And then we're proposing 35 feet from very specific designated public flood control projects, and that list is also on the slide and is a very specific list in the ordinance. So it's really just the things listed. It's not something to be interpreted. And then any water course that meets the definition of a creek, has a bed and a bank, but isn't one of these two categories is a minor creek, and we're proposing 15 feet from the top of bank for those creeks. So some of the allowed uses within buffers, and some of these are contingent upon certain conditions, or it still has to be a certain distance from the top of bank, but those include things like native landscaping, restoration, stormwater management, flood control activities, safety lighting and fencing, public access ways and facilities, existing roads, new roads under certain conditions if they are the only access point for a parcel, and then maintenance and minor repair of existing structures. So when an existing structure that's non-conforming is modified more than 50%, it becomes substantially redeveloped and is considered a new structure that would have to meet the new buffer. So also, this is consistent with the coastal LUP, but there's long sections and procedures and about how to define top of bank. And these are some of the example illustrations in the ordinance, and these, again, are the same as those that are in the coastal LUP really trying to take away the guesswork and the constant negotiating of what top of bank is. And we've heard a lot of good feedback about both these top of bank definitions and also the numeric buffers in the coastal LUP, that they've really cut down on all the back and forth and argument going on. So as I mentioned, modifications to the numeric buffers can be approved by Planning Commission in the proposed ordinance. This would only be for cases of severely constrained lots where private property takings would result, or for state mandated housing. So things like certain types of ADUs and certain types of multifamily housing. In these cases of modifications, there are limitations on the amount of development allowed on the entire parcel, so within and outside the buffer, and that differs by the type of property it is. And then technical reports are required to make sure, looking at, the amount of erosion on that portion of creek, biological resources, et cetera. So the findings for the modification include the development has to be located as far from the creek as possible, would not result in a nuisance, will not increase erosion hazards, will be safe from erosion hazard over the life of the structure, that measures are incorporated into the project to avoid or minimize impacts to creeks and riparian and wetland habitats, that other code standards such as like front yard setbacks, et cetera, have been modified to the extent feasible to provide the maximum amount of buffer, and that the project would not result in a significant impact. So these are some pretty hefty findings, really trying to make sure that we are getting as much buffer as we can in these situations. So when the 2019 LUP buffers went through, we actually came to this commission. I think Cameron and I did the presentation at that time. And this commission unanimously moved forward those regulations. We went to Planning Commission. We had this very extensive public outreach period. We ended up getting a support letter from a coalition of 13 environmental organizations. It was really quite a positive response. I think everybody was kind of surprised, to be honest, about how positive it was. And so we are really hoping that we get the same positive response on this ordinance. As far as next steps, we're doing an interdepartmental staff review of all the different departments in the city of the ordinance right now. And that will be going on through September. Somewhere around October, we should be releasing it for public review. So we're going to be releasing not just the ordinance, but also what's called an LCP amendment so that it can apply in the coastal zone and outside the coastal zone. We'll be coming to the Creeks Advisory Committee again for a review of the actual ordinance and forwarding to Council. Sustainability Council Committee will be looking at it, Planning Commission, and then Ordinance Committee. And then we're hoping for approval by City Council at the end of the year. At that point, City Council would be forwarding the LCP amendment for certification to the California Coastal Commission. So this is our plan, and we're excited to get going on this. And that concludes my presentation if you have any questions.
Chair Gaskin? Question, Melissa. What kind of outreach will you do, and are you allowed to do to organizations like the ones that signed on last time you did a change? So does Creeks send out letters to the Environmental Defense Center, to Urban Creeks, to other organizations that work on these issues, asking for their feedback?
So we are planning to have a number of stakeholder meetings. Last time we did actually do kind of like group presentations to community groups that kind of have the same issue areas or same concerns. So we can definitely do that this time. We are planning to present and meet with as many groups as possible, or those that might be interested. In addition, we are talking about sending postcards to all the creekside property owners. I think it's important for them to understand what's going on. And yeah, any other feedback you might have on public outreach would be welcome.
Questions? Please.
Well, first of all, I'm excited that the city is starting to look at buffers for creeks. I think that's a good step in the city of Santa Barbara. I know it follows from other cities around here that have similar types of ordinances. And my question was in slide 9, with public access ways and facilities being an exception to the buffer. I was just wondering what kind of some examples or limits for what counts as that include. Like, for example, in kind of an extreme hypothetical, if the city wanted to build like a new city library right next to Mission Creek, would that be an exception because it's a public facility? Like, what defines like a building from a public facility, if that makes sense?
Yes, that's a great question. This one has a lot of refinement in the ordinance itself, but some of the things are like public access ways, like trails, can be as close to the creek as they want to be, but a hard path has to be at least, I forgot what it is now, like 25 feet or something like that. So yeah, I would say this is a big category. It's not just like a wholesale, it's like allowed. A lot of the facilities are existing. So things like public parking lot, public access parking lots, redoing those in the same footprint or moving it farther away is allowed. So on that, I'm happy to go into more detail when we have the ordinance in front of us about all the different types, and you can really see how they're different. There is also a modification process for new public facilities if they don't meet these parameters, but they require the same findings that we just saw. So, yeah.
Questions? Please, Todd.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Melissa, I'm new here and don't know the details you've been through beyond this presentation, but I wanted to say as a rookie, congratulations to you and your team on this. This is extremely challenging as both a science and a technology to apply to nature, but one that is desperately needed, I think, and it gives routine and support and protection that's really needed. I'm glad to hear your last effort in 2019 was so positively received. I would hope for the same on this one. Good job.
Thank you. I certainly echo that as well. It's nice to see us finally move into greater protection of the banks and the floodplains. I had a question on slide 9 as well. And it's the last bullet, and you alluded to it, maintenance and minor repair of existing structures. So let's say we do have an existing structure. The city then will need to make a determination if something is of a substantial redevelopment or a minor. And am I correct that substantial redevelopments might perhaps not be approved if they're within that setback, redevelopments of existing structures?
Yes, so the definition of substantial redevelopment actually comes from both the coastal UP and is the same one in there for creek areas and buffers. It's also in the municipal code. But yes, if you trigger substantial redevelopment, the idea is that you're basically extending the economic life of that structure another 75 years, or it's basically a new structure at that point. And so yes, at that level, we'd want to see the structure moved. Yeah.
And then the modifications on slide 12 that you went through, I know it's so hard to predict. Do you see these being rare events that modifications are requested, or is the city doing this to just kind of catch and have an out for people?
So it's not called modifications, but essentially through the coastal development permit process, this modification process already exists, and it hasn't been used yet. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because for existing, let's say, a single-family property, the limitations on the amount of development that you get with a modification are the same size house you have now or less. And so in general, when people are completely redeveloping their parcel, they're not generally wanting to build the same size house. And so it's really a deterrent. It ends up deterring people. They find ways to do the modifications. But that said, there are more modifications in this ordinance to deal with state-required housing that we have to have in there now. And so I'm not sure if we'll see more because of that or not. But those are also priority housing, like affordable housing and things like that. So we'll see.
Thank you. Okay. Anything further? Otherwise, we'll move. Oh, do we need to ask for public comment? Is there any public comment on item B, proposed creek buffer ordinance? Seeing none, we'll move to item C, Creek Restoration Water Quality Improvement Division Program Funding Guidelines.
So most of you guys are pros at the funding guidelines, but we have new members, and then additionally, I think every budget season, it seems this question comes up. And so the committee members had asked for the guidelines, and so we thought we'd give a quick presentation and allow for discussion. So as you all know, in the late 90s, there was a number of beach closures and water quality concerns on the creeks in Santa Barbara County. And so a coalition of nonprofits, and it was really a grassroots coalition, put Measure B on the ballot, and it was passed in 2000. And it raised transiency occupancy tax by 2%. It was considered a special tax, meaning that the money doesn't just go into the city's general fund to pay for whatever. It's really a directed tax that can only be used for what was stated on the ballot measure. So the ballot measure directed that the additional funds be used to fund programs to improve the quality of stormwaters and other surface waters discharged into the Pacific Ocean, to carry out creek restoration improvements, and for project or programs to improve the quality of onshore or offshore waters. Once this was passed, it was codified in Municipal Code Chapter 4.09. So almost immediately when the Creeks Division was formed and the Creeks Advisory Committee was formed, it became very clear that some more detail about how the money should be used and funding guidelines should be developed. And so city staff and the Creeks Advisory Committee really spent a lot of time developing the exact wording of the funding guidelines. And in December 2002, they were approved by the Creeks Advisory Committee. And then following that, in April 2003, they were approved by City Council. And then again in 2009, the Creeks Advisory Committee looked at potential changes to the guidelines and decided instead to keep them the same and reaffirm the guidelines at this time. And I think since then, there have been budget cycles where it's come up at council, but the guidelines have never actually been changed since 2003. So the funding guidelines allow for funding to go to 4 major areas: water quality improvement, to improve creek and ocean water quality through a reduction of pollution in stormwater and urban runoff that enters city creeks; creek restoration, policy and planning, so things like the creek ordinance it's a perfect example of that; and then public information and education. And then I wanted to put the guidelines threshold criteria, like word for word, on the slides, because I feel like they were probably so wordsmith that they should probably just be read aloud. So the first is that The project, program, or service must be new or an expansion of a program, neither of which replaces funds otherwise available. That the project or program must demonstrate direct link to water quality improvement or creek restoration in a cost-effective manner. That the project must identify specific benefits, costs, desired outcomes, and methods of gauging project success. And that the project could include a public information component where feasible. Projects must include a budget detailing all proposed expenditures and minimum administrative costs. Projects must be responsive to the creek restoration and clean water goals and objectives. And that the project must show funding efficiencies, collaboration, and other resources in addition to Measure B funds. So I did some highlighting here because when staff looks at these guidelines, the things that we consider very strongly are, of course, the direct link to water quality improvement. Cost effectiveness is a big factor, whether or not it's a new or expansion of a program. We always try to include a large public information component. And then collaboration is key, especially with other city departments, public works, and et cetera. So what else do I have here? I think that's it. So I'll leave these on this screen, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so very much. That's very helpful, and I'd love to see us just review that every year when new members join us. That's great. Questions? Yeah, this is our holy grail. I mean, this is what our purpose and function is, so thank you. Okay, any comments from the public? Seeing none, we will then adjourn at 6:52 p.m. Thank you very much.